All right, well, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on some real-world examples and conversation on oncology studies, which we all know are quite a challenge. My name is Karen Wills. I'm the head of marketing here at Strategikon Pharma, and I'd like to just welcome you all to our webinar. Some very brief housekeeping here is if you have any questions that you have for any of the panelists, there is a question panel on your control panel, and if you just enter it into there, we will be tracking that, and hopefully we'll get all of your questions answered. And if not, we'll be happy to take them offline if we start going way too long. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed panel of experts that we have here, and hopefully you'll enjoy listening to all of them. So I'm going to let them go through and do their own introduction briefly, and then we'll launch right into the questions. So Bill, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Certainly. So my name is Bill Karich. I am the Associate Director for Business Operations within our Clinical Research Development Department at CSL Behring. Our primary focus is on rare disease. The rare disease space, we have some oncology space as well that we have been focusing on for as long as I've been at the company, for about 6.5 years, and our pipeline suggests that we'll continue on those paths. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. Radhika?
Yeah, hi there everyone. My name is Radhika Sivaramakrishna, and I'm Head of Project Delivery at Strategikon. And I have about 25 years of experience in the field. Like to think of it as all 4 sides of the business. So I've been in on the sponsor side in multiple different roles as head of project management, clinical operations, process excellence, outsourcing, etc. I also have been on the CRO side, leading multiple portfolios of different clients. I've also been on the site side at 2 different premier institutions, and I've also been on the vendor side, and I'm now again on the vendor side, in terms of providing services to CROs and sponsors. Very excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like you have a great, well-rounded background and should add a lot to our panel. Thank you, Radhika. And Brad, how about you?
Karen, thanks for inviting me to the panel. My name's Brad Miller. I'm dialing in from a nice sunny Sydney morning here in Australia. My title. Point that out, didn't you? I did. My title is the Clinical Operations Director here at Biosceptre, and we're currently focusing on our antibody therapeutic and our CAR-T therapeutic programs. Excellent.
Well, thank you, and thank you for joining us from the sunny down under. It's getting colder here in the Northeast, but I'm telling you, we got to get down there sometime and visit you. So yeah, Bill, we're thinking of a road trip, Radhika and me and you, and we'll go visit Brad. What do you say?
By all means, come on out. So.
All right. Okay, well, so we have a few questions here that I'll kind of read a little bit of an intro, and then I'll direct the question to one of you guys, and the other 2 will have a chance to jump in on their responses and add things in. So that'll be kind of the format here. So we'll start at like kind of the beginning of an oncology study, which they have a unique structure in that they generally include escalating or expanding cohorts, starting with 3 or 4 patients to determine efficacy and safety. And this process could go through 3 or 4 steps to get to a maximum tolerated dose. Once that is determined, you can then expand to a larger group of patients and move into further phases. However, modeling these patient groups and the timing clearly complicates enrollment and the cost of the study. So when setting up an oncology study, how do you budget for this complication? And then what are some of the pitfalls that you may have fallen into? So Brad, I'm going to throw that question to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think one of the key parts of addressing this question is to make sure you undertake some what-if analysis. So let's go through a couple of different scenarios. Let's say the first scenario is our best case. Let's assume there is no DLTs, recruitment is relatively quick, there's no slowdown with site activation, there's no screen failures, and let's look at the timeline associated with that. Then let's move on and go to a worst case scenario. So let's assume there's DLTs at every dose level, there is slower recruitment, there is screen failures, and understand those two different timelines. I was looking at budgeting a standard 3+3 traditional design for an oncology study. And just by adding one DLT to each of those different dose levels, we increase the study length by approximately 45 weeks, so 10 months. So once you understand that best case and that worst case scenario, and you understand the timeline implications of both of those, then you can come back and say, okay, well, what's that going to do to our costing? One of the other big key elements of an early stage clinical design, especially for a traditional 3+3, is to look at the additional number of patients that you'll need if you hit those DLT dose levels. So in my design that I was working on, we went from 18 patients if we had no DLTs, up to 36 patients if we did. So not only was there that massive increase in timeline, but there was also a massive increase in patients. So I think my advice can be summarized into really one key step is to do the what if analysis, look at multiple scenarios, understand the timeline implications, the subject number implications, and then you can go back and say, okay, well, what are the implications from our CRO budget as well as our, different vendors, central labs, imaging, etc.
Okay. Bill, do you have things to add to that?
Yeah, so similar to what Brad had mentioned there, it's really about your planning as you're thinking through, at least from our perspective, what we've seen is it comes up with the planning at the beginning and do plan every different scenario, every thought process, every nuance, and then throw something like COVID on top of it just for fun to figure out what countries are going to stay open, which ones are not going to stay open, how does that affect your enrollment. It's similar to most of oncology trials as well as a rare disease. There are things you can control and plan for, and there are things you can't. And a lot of those are discovered along the way, similar to amendments that are known and not known. So when you are modeling, one of these studies, it's important that you do understand, and as Brad had mentioned, the intricacies of each cohort, or how many different cohort escalations are you going to have? Is it sequential? Is it in parallel? And you really have to think through how one directly affects the other. Some may not. What I've found that when we are planning these kind of studies is that we really do it in a visual perspective. So we plan our patient groups and we understand how that progresses through the journey of a study. But it does come back to just, I think for an oncology study that we had just built, or I think we built 25 different scenarios at the beginning, and they're coming back to do more changes, which is good because we can always reflect back on all of our historical scenarios to figure out what, even if there was a small adjustment in this one scenario, how it directly impacted all the downstream effects. So it's just having those difficult conversations, not planning best case scenario only, and thinking through all options. So.
Okay. Radhika?
Yeah, I think Brad and Bill pretty much summarized this very well. So I think the planning upfront is super important because I've been in multiple situations where, of course, senior management wants everything done in 6 months, right? But you have all these different cohorts. And if you don't really think through the details of all of them, how much time has to be where you have to wait for perhaps the DMC to look at your data and then agree to, be able to go no-go to the next cohort, all of those gaps, planning the best and the worst case, you might fall into a situation where you've really underestimated both the number of patients, the budget, the timeline, and all of that. So I think for me, the upfront planning is really important. And of course, if you had a tool to do that where you can just lay this all out, would be the best. Oftentimes we do this on, many sponsors may just send this out to the CRO to kind of get an estimate, and they may not have looked at all the different scenarios, and you may just get the best case, and then you present that to management, and then later on you find that actually it takes several months longer than what you had planned. So I think it's really important, as both Brad and Bill said, to do that planning, to really work this out. Sometimes the bottom-up approach of really putting, pen to paper or in a system, really fleshing that out, being able to model all those different scenarios and then present that and then figure out, of course, the answer may be somewhere in the middle, but unless you know the boundary of what you're looking at, you may fall into the error of underestimating things, which might later on you'll pay the price of having to do an amendment or having to update your budget. None of that is very pleasant to do later. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure it's with many things. The longer you leave it, the the worse it gets. So
Yes. Yes.
So we do. So actually, what I'm going to do now actually is we're going to launch our first poll. We actually have a poll to it'll help our panelists here to get an idea of what the audience thinks are their biggest challenges. So let's see if we can have let me launch the poll here. Poll must be closed to enable screen sharing. So, all right. So I guess it's distributing the poll to you guys. Hopefully, people can see the poll. Feel free. We'll give you a couple of minutes to add it, and then we'll go ahead and show what the results are. So for our panelists, the question is, what are the most significant challenges that you see in oncology studies? And their options are, too many or unclear assumptions, need to depend too heavily on CROs, labor intensive old technologies and systems, complexity, difficult to rebudget and create scenarios, and then lack of historical database. So looks like it's pretty stable right now. Let me close the poll, and I'll share it for you guys. Can you see the poll results?
I see 3 different colors. So how do we interpret that?
So it's the it's a little odd. So right now the red is we have about 25% of the attendees say there's too many or unclear assumptions. 33% say that they need to depend too heavily on CROs. 25% say labor intensive, old technology and systems, and 17% say it's very complex and difficult to rebudget and create scenarios. And nobody has an issue with a lack of historical bid database.
Yeah.
So that was So that was interesting. So we might end up coming back to that as another question for you guys. Okay, so let's. Right, here's a question from the audience. Do you guys want to take questions in line, or the question comes? Yeah, okay, so the question is, how much time on average does it take from final enrollment model to improved budget, ballpark range? So once you get your final model, so Bill, do you have any sort of approximation on that?
Yeah, so from your final enrollment model, which is a component of when we're doing the forecast, is to actually build the model within the tool. It doesn't take long at all. It's really evaluating all the intricacies. So if we have an enrollment and you have to stop for the next cohort, or and you plug that in as different patient groups.
Yeah.
The system works like most other systems. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you put minimal things in there, you're going to get something out there that you can't really stand on. So the more intricate details you have and look at help. But the value that I find with the tool is locking the assumptions or inputting the assumptions and then continuously going back and editing them and tweaking them to see the progression of what you're adding. And you can put notes in there. There's so much flexibility within the system that we use that I mean, if I have all of the input I need to build a budget, I could build it in 10 minutes. I mean,
how long would it have taken you before you had the tool?
Oh God.
Come on, I had to ask the question. It was either me or Radhika.
Yeah.
Well, the accuracy is the component,
okay,
right?
Fair enough.
So you can't really go back and dig and I'm not surprised that that poll had nothing about, nobody found it was difficult to go find historical bids and information, because this is all research. It's all different. It's
Yeah.
sometimes what you went out with before